while I'm the one doing the presentation, I certainly had a bunch of help on this, and I know Tom Haregrove's here somewhere. Tom's my partner on this and got me interested in the subject but when he called over one day and we started working on this. I guess I should say right off the bat that I guess in honor of our topic today or in recognition of it, I used a brand new jump drive to load my program. I took it right out of the plastic when we started. So, just in case, you know. So, with that, we'll jump right into this, and I'll show you a set of kind of economic results that we have, kind of where we are on this, and so I think some other directions that we want to go with this. I look forward to any kind of questions you might have, and thanks again for inviting me. By overview, I'm gonna hit basically three parts. One is we've done this analysis starting off so far looking at Texas specifically, but I think it'll give us some direction for where we might think about some more national type economic impact of this. So I'll go through that, a list of some assumptions that we start out with, some economic impact, and then I'm going to take this and look at a ranch level look at the economics of this disease, and talk about the scenario that I've looked at here. So with that, we had to make a whole set of assumptions, as I'm sure you can guess. I'm going to go through about 2 slides of these. In asking lots of questions and working around this, we came up with an assumption that basically we have 20% of the herds in the state that would have had this. So either have it, infected, whatever that rate is. We got about 20% of the herds was our best estimate of what that rate was. I'm going to be careful with the words I use because I am an economist, and I may use words like prevalence or incidence or something, and I probably use them wrong. So I'm going to try to be careful, but just with that caveat, no doubt, I will use them wrong. So 20% of the herds. So we try to get from herds to number of cows, or our cow herd anyway, overall. The last data we had was we had about 150,000 operations with cattle in the state. We took a weighted average of weaning rate, so a weighted average of calves sold per cow. And of course we're using annual data. So we took a base assumption of that an 85% weaning rate on our herd on 80% of the operations that don't have it. And then we took 73% on the 20% of cattle operations that do have it. And that 73% weaning rate would reflect maybe a variety of types of management strategies in terms of calving intervals, all the way from year-round to 90-day calving intervals. And so we tried to generalize that to a rate on a herd that had the disease chronically, if you will, or they have some rate of incidence going on year after year in that disease. So then if we take a weighted average of those, the 20% that's got 73% weaning rate and the 85% with 80, we estimated a number of calves not produced because of the disease. So if we're thinking about what our benefit is for elimination of the disease or getting rid of the disease, that's the gain in the number of calves we might expect to see over our industry in Texas as a whole. We made a couple of other assumptions in looking at, we just basically assume that we have a 90-day calving interval. There's a whole bunch of other scenarios that are pretty reasonable here. And if we look at some of the past literature, what little's been done on the economics of the disease, some of the other scenarios you see are much longer calving intervals, but because of the rebreeding, you get a lot lower weights. So if we take a shorter calving interval, they don't rebreed, and we end up with fewer calves. So there's a trade-off in the scenarios you look at through lighter weights or fewer calves. We ended up just to try to stop too many moving parts, We went with a 90-day calving interval, so we get fewer calves born because of that. I think it's a fair assumption to look at other scenarios as well, other that are really related to the management of the cattle operation and how long you leave the bulls out and what that calving interval is to boost the calving rate, but you're spreading out the calves more and you're giving up weight, if that makes sense. So that's kind of a basic assumption that we used in looking at this. When we do that, across the state as a whole with our cow herd, we end up with an estimate of losing approximately 96,000 calves. Those are calves that we didn't get that we would have gotten if we didn't have the disease, if that makes sense. It's benefits lost or revenue lost because of this incidence. It's about 2.5% fewer calves born when we look at that weighted average. If we take 2013 average prices, when we first did this kind of on a Big Chief tablet, well, shoot, $1,000 a calf, that's $96 million. Well, I actually went and did average calf prices with an average weight. We got about $95 million of lost revenue given up at the cow-calf sector for Texas by itself. Without extending this to other states or more states, that's basically our frontline kind of estimate of the cost of the disease or the revenue calves sales that were not realized because of the disease. Obviously, if we take a couple steps further, if we go to the feedlot or finish level, that's 96,000 more fed cattle that we would have generated in our industry. If we value them at that finished level, then we're thinking, then we look at about $156 million in lost revenue that wasn't realized. If we go a step further and look at an economic impact, where we look at a multiplier and we look at the revenue that's generated throughout the economy, and we look at jobs, the impact on jobs, employment, revenues, and such as that, we approach $300 million in terms of the direct, secondary, and indirect effects of the disease through the loss of those 96,000 calves, using a standard multiplier, using M-Plan as our input-output model. So it's not an unsubstantial, that's a significant number, I think, when we look at the total economic impact of this, whether we're looking at cow-calf, feedlot, or total economic impact. That's a pretty big number, I think. I wanted to make a couple other, to take that a little bit further. Given the infrastructure losses we've had in the state due to drought, due to where we are in terms of the cattle cycle, 96,000 more fed cattle is a pretty good sized feedlot. Given the number of feedlot capacity that we're losing in empty bunk space every year because of fewer cows in the state, fewer calves, and that's a lot more cattle going through a packing plant too that we don't have. So if we think about the effect of this going further, I just kind of threw that out to keep that in mind. We do in our Agriculture and Food Policy Center, which I'm part of at Texas A&M, we do a series of what we call representative farms and ranches around the U.S., where we work with, we might call it a focus group of farmers and ranchers in kind of major production areas around the country. And they sit down with us, and over the course of a morning or an afternoon, we build on paper what a representative ranch or farm looks like in that area. It's not a survey. It's not a statistically valid, stratified random sample. It's a group of 5 or 6 experts, and the experts are those ranchers. And so what we do is we build on paper the number of cows, calves, cost, returns. Then we take that and we do some financial projections of that operation. We typically go out 10 years. We use some projected prices, and then we look at the effect of changing policies, programs, disease control, things like that on the financial viability of that farm or ranch in the future over that time horizon. So what we did here is we took one of these representative ranches that happens to be in Texas, Guthrie, Rolling Plains area of the state. This representative ranch has 335 cows. It had 500 before the drought. So we've seen some significant cutback. And I should say, too, we go back about every 2 years with the same group of ranchers, same group of farmers or dairy producers, whatever, and we update that data. So we're getting changes, and we've been doing this kind of work for about 30 years through our group. So with this representative ranch, we took this and we did a base, which is just the ranch going forward. It happens to have an 85% weaning percent. It's 85%, they're selling 85% of or producing 85 calves per 100 cows on that January 1 inventory. Our scenario was to use that same assumption that we started with and cut that weaning rate to 73%. And then take this, so instead of the big statewide numbers I talked about before, let's look at a ranch economic level of having this disease versus not on the ranch. I'm going to show two basic changes. It's dollars on the right. It's the change in revenue and the change in net cash farm income. Net cash farm income is revenue minus expenses. I pulled 1 year out of this, but these would be annual changes in revenue and net cash farm income from that rate of incidence, that rate of cutting back calves on this ranch. And the change is almost $37,000 reduced revenue on the ranch. It's about $44,000 reduced net cash farm income. It's not exactly profit, but, revenues over your costs. Almost a $44,000 decline every year. So it's a pretty large amount of dollars from changing that calving rate from 85 to 73%, reflecting the incidence of the disease on the ranch. If I took that in terms of percentage terms, it's about a 9% cut in revenue. It's an 81% decline in returns over costs. So it takes out almost all of the profit, if you will. It's not exactly the correct profit measure, but returns over costs, it costs the ranch about all of it. And so I think that's a pretty significant effect of the disease when we look at this. I think it highlights a different set of economic impact rather than aggregate numbers as a whole. What's it do to that ranch income? So I think that's a pretty significant amount, and certainly the cumulative effect over time is pretty large. In fact, when you dig into the numbers, it basically makes that ranch unprofitable to where they're losing money, and also having the cumulative financial effects as they try to reborrow operating and dig themselves out of the hole. They get further and further underwater, and it becomes long-term not a sustainable, financially sustainable operation over time. I think we've got a whole bunch of things where we'd like to go with this. One is, I think we want to formalize some alternative scenarios. I laid out the one as a 90-day calving interval and walked through that. I think there's several of these things we would like to carry this forward on, whether we're talking calves or changing weights. We have a series of these representative ranches in a number of states. I think we have the opportunity to look at these alternative scenarios across all of this handful of representative ranches that we have. And of course, we want to write it up and get it out there, I think, in terms of that communication, as the speaker before me talked about, the opportunity to kind of educate us on what the impact and the importance of this disease is financially or economically, I think is pretty important. So we want to go with that as well. So really, that should be my last slide. So I'd like to, we got plenty of time for questions, so I'd be happy to take any questions you might have, and if you don't have one, catch me in the back. I'm going to hang around all day and learn something too. So